Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Books and Books. I'm Mitchell Kaplan. On behalf of all of us here at the bookstore, I want to welcome you to this, what really is a very special night for us here at the bookstore. The reason why you see all of these lights and these guys with the cameras is because we are also live streaming this. So supposedly there are people in India watching this, people in Mexico, people anywhere around the world could be watching this live right now. And so if you're sitting next to someone you're not so sure you want to see on TV, you might want to move. Also, if in fact you want to repeat this event, and I know it's going to be a spectacular event, and watch it again, we archive these things up at our website, which is booksandbooks.com. So if you're tweeting or doing anything, just tell everyone around the world that they should be going to the Books and Books website right now and watching this event tonight. The reason why it's very special is because tonight we're launching, it's the very first event for a author who's written his first book, a book that has come with huge amounts of anticipation, and a book that we're all very excited about. And you'll see in a minute why. And it's also another reason why it's very special. It's not very often that we have the book's editor here with the author to discuss with the author the editing process and about the book and all of those sorts of things. So I hope you'll have some really good questions to ask as well toward the end of the evening. I would personally like to thank someone who's very important to me and to all of us here in South Florida, even though you don't know her and she lives in New York. And her name is Maggie Richards, and she's right over here. Maggie pretty much runs Henry Holt. I just got her into a lot of trouble with everybody from Henry Holt. But in my eyes, she does. And Maggie is responsible almost from the beginning that we started in supporting our efforts here in South Florida by sending authors our way, by talking us up, and making us feel very important, probably more important than we really were at the time. So I thank you, Maggie, and I thank you for helping to put this evening together. My role is going to be to introduce Gillian Blake, who is the editor of the Book of Jonah. And Gillian has spent approximately 16 years in publishing. She was an editor at Bloomsbury, also an editor at Scribner. Over the course of her career, she worked with a whole variety of different people, including Russell Brand. He wrote a book called My Bookie Wook. You might remember that. She also worked with Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, who was a National Book Award finalist for her book, a marvelous book that we presented here at the store called Random Family. Very, very important book. It's been said of Gillian that she brings a discerning eye and the kind of editorial enthusiasm which has made her beloved by her authors and highly respected in the industry. Gillian will focus on acquiring high-profile nonfiction titles for the different publishers she works for, and more specifically for Henry Holt. She has just by coincidence, in today's New York Times, there's a remarkable article about one of the more recent books that she's edited called The Sixth Extinction in Unnatural History by Elizabeth Kolbert. And Michiko Kakutani, who's not an easy reviewer, gave this a rave. And as you can see, the headline says, "The Cataclysm has arrived." The book will arrive next week. So I hope you'll all make a point of looking for that book as well. But tonight it's all about the Book of Jonah, and I'd like to welcome up Gillian Blake. Please give her a warm welcome.
I'll stand. Hi. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, everyone at Books and Books. Maggie and I came down last night, and we have had such a ball. We were here last night. We went over to the Lincoln Road store, and it's just an amazing bookstore. And we are thrilled to be here. I want to say that the author's grandmother is in the audience. Hello. Thank you for coming. One of my closest friends from college is in the audience. Thank you, Leslie, for coming. And I'm going to introduce Josh and tell you what we're going to do here. It's very fitting that we're doing this here because Josh now lives in Delray Beach, so he is local. And I first read this manuscript about 2 years ago, and I had that thing that editors talk about when you start reading, especially fiction. And it's hard to describe, but you get that moment of knowing that this is the real thing. And was lucky enough in a heated auction to acquire the book. And we did some revisions, which we'll talk about. And now the book is out tomorrow. So I'd like to introduce Josh. I call him Josh, who is slightly nervous because it is the eve of his publication, but very excited debut novelist. This thing is in here. I'm going to take this out. The live streaming got me a little nervous. Yeah. India.
Hello, India.
I'm not going to do too much description of the book to start, but I will say that it focuses on two characters, a very successful young corporate lawyer in Manhattan who has everything's going right for. He's about to probably make partner in his law firm. He's got 2 girlfriends, which might be a little complicated, and is just one of these really ambitious young men. And the other character we meet a little later, his name is Judith, and she has done everything she's supposed to succeed. And then something happens to derail her life, and then they meet. So that's the basic setup of the novel, but it's called The Book of Jonah. So you might guess that it is based or inspired by the biblical Book of Jonah. So the first thing I want to talk about is why Josh chose to take the inspiration from the Bible and focus on this tale in particular.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say how happy I am to be here, and thank you, everyone, for coming. It's so wonderful to see so many faces here and to be at such a wonderful place. Thank you, Mitchell, for the introduction, and this is really great to be here. So, the biblical Book of Jonah. What drew me to it was my feeling that this was a very and unusually human account of a relationship between a person and the divine. I see in Jonah's reaction, and I know not everyone has spent the last 2 years or 3 years of their life writing a book based on the Book of Jonah, so very quickly, God speaks to Jonah, tells Jonah, go to the other side of the ancient world, deliver a prophecy, and Jonah's response to this is basically to run screaming in the other direction. And I saw in that something that really seemed plausible to me. And I think a lot of us, if we were in that situation, if we suddenly had this moment, which we took to be a divine moment, telling us to do this crazy thing, I think a lot of us would do what Jonah does and just try to completely ignore it, go on with our lives, and pretend it never happened. So it was that human dimension that really drew me to the book and made me want to explore it further in a contemporary setting.
So when I was reading the manuscript on submission, Josh's agent sent me a quote from Harold Bloom, who I was lucky enough to work on 2 of his books. And if you have any questions about him, I can answer them later. He was quite a character, but he wrote about how it's, I don't know if he said it's the only funny book in the Bible or the funniest. So was that part of what drew you to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we don't, look, the Bible's not funny. You're not reading it, rolling on the floor laughing. But I think we don't give it enough credit for its attention to satire and irony and humor. And I think, Jonah in the Bible is sort of a hapless character. He just can't get it right, and it never seems to work out that way, the way that he thinks it should. And even at the end, when everything, the city he's meant to deliver the prophecy to has been saved, and it's, in a sense, this happy ending, Jonah is completely dissatisfied and wants to die. So I think there's real humor there. There's intentional humor there, and I think that's a really wonderful thing.
So one of the things I love about the book is that it is funny, your book. And it's not funny in that kind of, comic one-liners. It's funny in the characters and the situations that they put themselves into, especially the main character, by ignoring these visions. He gets himself into more and more trouble. But at the same time, you're after big game with this book. It's got a lot of big issues that you're tackling about faith and about sort of how do you describe or explain what's inexplicable. Did you find that balancing some of the more comic moments of the book with the more serious aspects was difficult? Or, I should also say that Josh started his career as a playwright, so maybe I'm already answering your question for you, but I wonder if your experience as a playwright helped with that.
Yes, absolutely. You find very quickly in theater where the response is immediate and you can know right away how you're doing with the audience. If you give too much metaphysical musing for too long, no one's interested. It's not philosophy, it's entertainment. And so that sort of led me to thinking about how can you tell a story that does sort of delve into these deeper questions that people are going to read. And for me, story is very important. I think it's has to be the animating force of just about any book. And I certainly tried to make it the animating force of mine, something that would keep people turning the pages first and foremost.
Well, if you haven't read it, it is a page turner for sure, and lots of plot twists. So I just want to talk for a second about our editorial process, because I know you don't always have the editors down here. And as I said, I loved this novel from the get-go. But when there were some things that we worked on, and the first one is kind of, I think, funny, a little funny, and that is that Josh uses a lot of dashes when he writes, dashes, and I got so into the book that I just stopped noticing it. But when I reread it the second time and I had to do the edit on it, I thought, well, I'm not sure why is this dash here and this one, and it was a little too much for me. So I thought, it's his style, it's artistic license. We'll just kind of leave him in. I took out some of them, and then when I'm done with a book, it goes to the copy editor. So that's the person who's responsible for grammar and punctuation and more nitty gritty. And the copy editor is like, whoa, what is up with these dashes? So we had to, because anyway, consistency is what the copy editors care about the most. So if you don't use a serial comma, never use a serial comma, right? That's what they care about. So I just, I'm wondering, did you always write with this? Some people use no punctuation at all. Your thing is the dash.
Yeah, my thing is the dash. I own it. I love it. I'm not ashamed of it. And I did learn in the process of writing this book, if you want to drive a copy editor crazy and want to watch their mental descent through the pages, through the galley pages, use a lot of dashes. I don't know exactly where I caught the sort of dash disease, but I think it's a really flexible piece of punctuation. I mean, the sort of the more I can give a high-minded rationale, which is, I think when I'm writing sentences, I think a lot of terms of pacing, and the dash is another. It's kind of signals a not exactly a pause, but more of a beat within the sentence. Mm-hmm. So I think that was sort of the rationale from which it developed, but. Look, I felt bad for the copy editor. They seem to really be having a hard time with this. So, yeah, you meet in the middle.
Well, there are plenty of dashes still for you to enjoy. So another thing that I'm going to actually ask you guys a question here, because this was an interesting thing that came up, because it's sort of a question about, what can you do in fiction and what's sort of off limits. The second time I read the novel, a very 9/11 features in the book, and there's an important plot point where I guess I'm going to give a little bit away if you haven't read it by telling you this, but one of the characters' parents die. They're victims in 9/11, and they flew out of Boston on the flight. It was hijacked, and the daughter was supposed in Josh's first draft had just gone off to Harvard and had gone to visit them. And when I was reading it the second time, I thought, I went to Harvard, and Harvard started notoriously late. Like all my friends went back, went to school, and you don't go till the end of September. And I thought, I'm not sure that Harvard was in session on September 11th. And I call him, and we do some Googling, and Harvard was not in session on September 11th. But it was really important to the novel that this happen. And so we went back and forth and said, well, how many people are really going to catch that? Does this matter? And if they catch it, will they care because it's fiction? So my question to you is like a brief show of hands. He changed it. The novel was changed in order to deal with this question.
Congratulations, Yale.
Would as readers, do you care? Would that have been, a show of hands of yes, if I caught something like that, it would have bugged me? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So we thought, do you do an author's note? Anyway, we went back and forth.
Yeah, it's tricky because you want to get it right, but you want to sort of serve the fiction first. And I think it made a lot of sense for that character to go to Harvard for a lot of reasons. And yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I think we made the right decision. I think you do sort of have to change it because there's, it is fiction, but you have to preserve like that certain fidelity towards what's possible and what's
right, and because we were dealing with actual historical facts versus some novels which are set entirely outside of historical fact, but it definitely was a tough question. And then the other thing that came up with the editing is that we did a fair amount of work on we just were talking about this beforehand, the second half of the book. These two characters in the first draft didn't actually meet till the very end of the book, and I felt that it was too long to ask the readers to wait, and there was a certain suspension of disbelief that they were really you had to really believe that the tie between them was going to actually hold through the whole novel. But okay, now's the time to be honest. When I came back to you and said I think you need to really think about some of these events in the second half. Was there a rolling of the eyes? Did you get it?
Total crisis, total breakdown. It was like a week in bed, curtains drawn, lights off, Depeche Mode on the stereo. It's terrible. It was awful. Everything is awful. It's always awful. No, yeah. Look, it is a process, and again, from a background in playwriting, you are taught very early that collaboration is something you have to do. And my goal was always to write the best possible book that I could. And I think if I'd felt more strongly about how things were executed at the end, if I thought those points were very important to the story I was trying to tell or the ideas I was trying to get across, it would have felt differently. But look, the lament you hear from every author is that their editors don't edit. So I was frankly grateful to have an editor who cared about the book and gave it thoughtful edits. So.
Well, thank you. I will also say that he did such a fabulous job on the revisions. That I had the same feeling that I'd felt, reading the new chapters that I had felt when I read the first draft, which was just, pure excitement, and also that it was a process where some of the events of the novel changed, but none of the meaning and the sort of the effect of the novel changed. So something else that is an interesting kind of coincidence with this novel. We finished it. It was sent, as we know, to the copy editor, and then waiting for it to come out, and I read the first review of The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. And I'm excited to read it, and I read the review, and it's set in New York City, Amsterdam, and Las Vegas. I was like, huh. Josh's novel is set in New York City, Amsterdam, and Las Vegas. How weird is that, right? Now, I've read The Goldfinch. I did love it. It's a very different novel, but it does follow the story of a young man, and it does take place in the same cities. And we spoke about this. Is this zeitgeist? They clearly do not know each other. You've never spoken to Donna Tartt. She had no idea what you were doing. You had no idea. So what do you think about that?
It's really weird, yeah. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know Donna Tartt. We're not We didn't talk about it beforehand. I think it's just something about those places. There's something that appeals to a literary mind. Obviously New York, plenty of people have written and will write books about New York. And I think, as I've thought about it, I think Amsterdam is one of the great cities in the world, and Las Vegas is one of the terrible cities in the world. So maybe something in that. Look, it's fine, but it's actually not fine. So yeah, I think something in that appeals to people who want to sort of peel back the layers of places, which is what you try to do when you're a writer. You try to, at a setting, you try to peel back the layers and show people something different.
But Amsterdam, I'm sort of particularly interested in, and because in your book, it's a time where Jonah's really wandering, right? He really doesn't know what to do with his life and how to deal with these sort of visions he's had. And it does seem that Amsterdam has that kind of wandering feel to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a very beautiful city. It's a very relaxed city. I think it's a place where people can go and just sort of float along for a little while. Smoke a lot of pot. Although you can do that in Colorado now. So maybe Donna Tartt's next book and my book will be set in Colorado. But yeah, I think with Amsterdam specifically, what Jonah's going through at that time is sort of what I'm talking about. He's sort of unable to look at just the surface of things. And I think one thing about Amsterdam and Europe generally is that, not too long ago, there was a very tortured history of what was happening in all these cities, which people now typically ignore in large part. And that sort of mirrored thematically what Jonah was going through, being unable to ignore certain facts of his life and his experiences with people around him.
Right, and then you send him to the newest city. Las Vegas is all new and glitter,
right.
and then I think really interestingly, that it has all these buildings that are homages to the great European.
That's a great point. That's a great point. There is that strange sort of Vegas is new, but it's going to be new based on something very old, only bigger and filled with slot machines.
Don't you equate Vegas with the Valley of the Whale?
Well, I think more Amsterdam, but I think it's, for me, drawing the parallels is, Jonah in the book is sent to Nineveh, and that was sort of, very roughly speaking, what I had in mind. I think Las Vegas is held up fairly or unfairly as sort of like this place of sin, this place where horrible things are happening. And I think it's obviously more complicated than that, but that was sort of the corollary I had in mind with the original biblical story when I wrote it.
I think it might be time for you to actually read some of this novel.
Okay.
Correct?
Great.
Right? Okay. Thank you.
Do I need to continue holding the mic as I'm reading? That might be a little tricky.
Oh, no, I don't think you can. Do you want me to hold your mic?
Now, hold on, let me see what I can do here. Well, so because the book is not out yet, I'm going to read from the beginning of the book, so no spoilers or anything like that. I don't think what I'm going to read requires much setup because, again, it's from the very beginning. And there's a couple accents mentioned. I'm not going to do the accents. There's some rap. I'm not going to rap. And yeah, I think I will just start right there. Jonah knew the 59th Street subway station well enough that he did not have to look up from his iPhone as he made his way among its corridors and commuters to the track. He felt lucky as he came down the stairs to the platform to see a train just pulling in. He boarded without breaking his stride, took a seat by the door of the nearly empty car, went on typing. A crowd of people flooded in at the next stop, but Jonah felt he'd had a long enough day that he need not give up his seat. But then an older woman, frumpy, blue-haired, with a grandmotherly sweet face and a tiny bell of a nose, ended up standing directly before him, and Jonah decided to do the right thing, and he stood. He was not on the train long, but when he got off, he saw that many of those moving past him on the platform were soaking wet, hair matted to foreheads, clothes translucent and sagging. They all bore it well, though, Jonah thought, stoically marched ahead with mouths fixed, eyes straight, as though they got drenched during every evening commute. Then, as he came to the stairwell leading up to the street, he found that a group of 20, 30 people was standing semicircled around the bottom, not continuing out. Jonah advanced a few steps. Rain cascaded down onto the concrete stairs in an unbroken sheet, making the light shining into the station pale and misty, as if they were all gathered behind a waterfall. Those in the group shrugged to one another at their predicament, tapped away in their smartphones, or just stared placidly at the rain, seemingly admiring this temporary transformation of the world outside. Some, having stood there for a few moments, turned up their collars or held out their umbrellas and flung themselves up the steps with a sort of reckless bravery. Those coming into the station, umbrellas bent, hair dripping, looked puzzled at the gathering below, as though finding a crowd of people in the subway unmoving, unshoving, even by and large content to be there, made their surroundings somehow unrecognizable. Jonah had been running late when he'd left his office, but he knew Quest events were always well attended. His absence from tonight's cocktail party for another 10 or so minutes wouldn't make much difference. He had time, in other words, to stand there and wait out the rain too. And he found he was glad for this momentary interruption of his day. He had lived in New York for almost a decade now, and was gratified to find, once again, that could still surprise him. Jonah Daniel Jacobstein was 32, a lawyer, ambitious, unmarried and dating, never without his iPhone. For all these reasons, his concerns tended to be immediate, tangible, billable. But every now and then, such moods of appreciation would wash over him. He would glance out the window of the Q train as it crossed over the Manhattan Bridge and would take in the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, the whole of the skyline over the river. He would climb into a taxi on a Friday night with crisp bills from an ATM in his pocket and Sylvia, or Zoe, to meet. He would be drunk at 4 a.m. with a great slice of grease-dripping pizza in his hand. And he would count himself incredibly lucky, as he did now, watching the rain in the subway station, to be who he was, when he was, where he was. But these moods never lasted long, of course, and after a moment he checks his phone again, this having become an almost autonomic response in him on the order of blinking. He'd gotten a dozen new emails since he'd boarded the train. That afternoon, a case he had spent the better part of a year working on had come to a settlement favorable to his clients. He was pleased to see in his inbox several congratulatory messages from colleagues, even a few from partners. He dropped his hand back to his side and saw that a very large Hasidic Jew had appeared beside him. Pink-faced, jowly, in black hat, black coat, forelocks dangling gently at his ears, his beard jet black, wiry and unkempt. The man was only a little older than Jonah, though he was much bigger, an enormous stomach protruding directly outward from above his waist, and he stared with peculiar scrutiny at the rain, as though he could recognize some subtle meaning in its drops. Normally, Jonah was an avid follower of the New York convention of never, under any circumstances, striking up a conversation on the subway with a stranger. But he was feeling cheerful, and there appeared to have been some temporary reordering of the New York conventions anyway. And, too, Jonah, whose own Judaism was characterized by deep ambivalence, had always had a certain curiosity regarding those Jews whose Judaism seemed characterized by life-consuming certainty. Recognizing this as one of his few opportunities to talk with such a member of his ostensible theoretical brethren, he turned to the Hasid and he said, "Don't you have a number to call when this happens?" In response, the Hasid pulled the sides of his fleshy face into a grin, sly, knowing, exposing yellowed teeth. He said, "You think I'd be on the train if I could make the rain stop?" Jonah chuckled. "You're on your way to some business meeting, my friend." "No, my day's over. I'm just going to an event." He found he was reluctant to call the cocktail party a charity event, though Quest was undisputably a charity. Describing it that way, however, struck him as somehow disingenuous. But the Hasid gave him a look of being greatly impressed by his answer. "I could see you were a man of the world. Where would we be without such people?" His voice was rich-toned, Russian-accented, and a little high-pitched in a decidedly wry sort of way. "You have a business card, my friend?" This request surprised Jonah, but he didn't see any harm in it. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed the Hasid one of his cards. "You're Jewish, my friend," the Hasid said, still more impressed. He studied the card carefully, as if taking note of each line, each digit, and each of the 3 phone numbers. "Well, I was raised Jewish," Jonah answered. "And do you study Torah, my friend?" the Hasid asked, now returning the card. "Do you keep the Sabbath?" I feel guilty on Yom Kippur. The Hasid's grin broadened. And you know, of course, the story of your namesake, Jonah, son of Amittai. Jonah's knowledge of such things had been half-heartedly acquired in the first place, was half-remembered at best. There was a whale, he ventured. Oh, my friend, there is much more than the whale. The Hasid had now moved his massive frame a little closer toward Jonah, whose back was already up against the side of a MetroCard machine. Jonah was a man of the world too, just like you, going about his business, making deals. Then one day Hashem came to him and said, Jonah, go to the corrupt city of Nineveh and tell them that while they have gold, finery, vast armies, only their body is clothed, but their soul is naked. Here the Hasid winked. Jonah nodded uncertainly, not sure what to make of this. But Jonah had other ideas, the Hasid went on. He tried to flee from the sight of the Lord. And what do you think happened? Storms, whales, disaster. Hashem sees everything, the Hasid continued, waving a playful finger beneath Jonah's nose. We think we can hide, but in the end there's no escaping. He inclined his thick-bottomed chin up toward the stairs, where the rain was tapering only slightly. Look what happens when the Lord sends even a little rain. Everyone runs underground, none can tell his right hand from his left. Won't it be so much more on the day of judgment, when calamity rains down from afar? Again, Jonah could only nod, not sure with how much sincerity the still grinning Hasid was asking. One day it's all a big party. Then the angels knock on Lot's door. What will you tell them? Remember, not everyone gets a seat on the ark. America is naked, my friend, as naked as Nineveh. Cell phones, computers, spaceships, yada, yada, yada. The body is clothed, but the soul is naked. Jonah believed he was learning all over again why you were supposed to avoid entering into these conversations. Well, it's all very interesting, he said. In any case, this social cue toward ending the encounter was unnoticed or ignored. You can't hide on the subway from the Lord's outstretched hand, the Hasid went on. Any more than Jonah could hide on the seas. Wouldn't you rather be counted among the righteous when the arrogant are washed away? I don't think the arrogant are going anywhere. Im Yirtzeh Hashem, we will live to see their destruction, the Hasid cried. It was all made the more disconcerting by the persistence of the wry grin on the Hasid's face. Though the rain was still falling heavily, Jonah edged his way around the MetroCard machine toward the stairs. But the Hasid leaned his head and large stomach even closer to Jonah, his breath unpleasantly musty. Remember, my friend, the Lord seeks out what has gone by. Nineveh, the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't you know history is full of 9/11s? With this, Jonah's patience, which varied in length but not in the consistency of the irritability to which it gave way, was exhausted. Implications that he was damned he could tolerate, because who could take that seriously? But moralizing about 9/11 was a different story. He had been in the city that day. And no, he had not lost anyone close to him. He had not been in any immediate danger. But he felt he had experienced enough of it that he shouldn't have to endure hearing it characterized as some sort of divine punishment. If you really think God had anything to do with 9/11, you're as ignorant as the people who did it. The Hasid looked deeply saddened and shook his head gravely. Oh, my friend, I'm afraid you've misunderstood everything. It's my fault. I didn't go to Harvard College. Neither did I. Nu, you think it matters to Hashem what you think is ignorant? And though the Hasid capped the question with a final and more definitive wink, as though the whole conversation was merely a shared joke between them, Jonah decided he had heard enough and walked over to the stairs and mounted them two at a time. Your bar mitzvah won't save you, my friend, the Hasid cried, and maybe even guffawed as he said it. The rain continued to fall steadily, quickly began soaking Jonah's hair, the shoulders of his suit jacket. He saw a few people huddled beneath the overhang in front of a discount shoe store. He ran over and pressed himself against the windows. Jonah didn't think anyone knew what mattered to Hashem, or whatever you wanted to call it. But he felt he understood the Hasid's point perfectly. You drew a circle around yourself, and everyone inside the circle was righteous, and everyone outside it was not. There wasn't much more to the Hasid's philosophy, such as it was, than that. He found himself standing beside a scruffy-looking black man, lanky, in a sweat-stained Yankees cap and cargo shorts, with large headphones over his ears, smoking the fingernail-sized remnants of a joint. He was rapping along with the music he was listening to. Everybody got their own thing, currency chasin', worldwide through the hard time, worrying faces, shed tears, bury brothers close to the heart, was a friend, now a ghost in the dark. The man chanted rhythmlessly, raspingly, then took a hit. Jonah knew he'd heard the song many times, though he couldn't immediately identify it. And it occurred to him how much more comfortable he was standing here, beside this man, than he was with the Hasid. Then Jonah remembered. Tupac, he said aloud. The man with the headphones turned and looked at him, glanced up and down at his suit suspiciously, and then laughed huskily, smoke pouring from his mouth. "Tupac," the man cried. "He ain't dead." "He ain't dead," Jonah agreed. This encounter, Jonah felt, was a better answer, a better retort than any he might have given to the Hasid. Who could ever say who was righteous and who was not, who was saved and who was damned? Staying open to the world and its inhabitants, living life, having fun, that was what mattered. If he had a circle, Jonah thought pridefully, this was the compass with which he would draw it.
We're going to sit if anyone has any questions.
Josh, I like the way you delivered the dashes. And I wondered, and I also commend you, I see that you're a 2-dash man. The 3-dash is a little too formal, I think, for today. But
It's inappropriate.
what I could hear you putting the beat in the sentence where the dash is, and I just wondered whether or not you think that maybe playwriting experience kind of led you this way, because it's almost like a miniature stage direction.
Yeah, absolutely, without question. And the sort of origin of my tormenting the copy editor with dashes is when I'd write plays, I would always write pause and beat in every line, and this drives directors crazy. But yeah, I think I've always had an attention in playwriting, and I guess to a certain degree also in writing fiction, to the rhythm of sentences and the sound of sentences. So I think that is, yeah, sort of where the dash comes from.
I like dashes.
All right, good.
No, I would just like, this is not a question, this is just a piece of information that you may want to tell your next copy editor, that in Danish, the dash is directly translated called a thinking line, a thought line.
That is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I can't wait to write that in the margin. Actually.
So in the editing process, when you first get the manuscript, and I'd love to hear about how you got the manuscript. Was it cold? Was it referred? Who did you know? How did you get to Jillian? Or just through your agent? And did you give it a special look or not because of that introduction? And then just what you read, how much of that was in the original manuscript? How much was that worked and changed? Everyone talks about how important the opening, scene and all this is to get the reader's interest. Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think that's probably pretty close to word for word what I
Yeah.
submitted.
No, I mean, I thought the opening was amazing the first time I read it. And again, hearing it tonight, I still had that feeling. This is, it really, I think it opens the book with a scene that really puts the themes of the novel right out there. And yet, you'll see, I think you saw, I mean, I heard people laughing. It's got humor, but it has these serious questions. So yeah, other than a few dashes, it's the same. And as far as how I got the novel, I'm an old friend of Josh's agent, and that's how 95% of my acquisitions and most editors at big houses acquisitions comes through a literary agent. She calls ahead of time and says, I am so excited about this novel, put things aside, read it this weekend, and that's what happened. And there was an auction, and other houses were bidding, and we got it.
So maybe the better question is, how did you pick or find your agent?
Well, basically I wrote her a query letter. I was familiar with her other books, the clients she represented. I thought it would be a good fit, and I reached out to her. I didn't know her beforehand. I wrote her a letter, and I described the stuff I was working on, and I sent her some stuff, and she liked it, and we had some conversations, and yeah, it was a good match. I mean, and the sort of, I don't want to give the impression that I sent one query. My first query letter got received, and I got picked up, and 2 weeks later I signed with Henry Holt. It is a process, and you have to seek out the right people, and you have to find the right match, and it's not a straightforward line by any stretch.
The Bible pays a lot of attention to names and what names mean, and obviously I get the Jonah part, but Jacob Stein's kind of an unusual name, happens to be my last name.
Oh, no, good. That's really nice.
Obviously I think you chose well, but I was wondering how you came up with that last name.
I may have had a reason at the time. I don't know that I remember what it was. I wanted him to have a very a distinctive name. I wanted to have a name that someone who's familiar with Jewish names would recognize as a Jewish name. And yeah, and I also think I think there's a certain rhythm to it. Jacobstein, I think, is a very lovely last name. So that probably, played a role too.
I'm just curious about your attention to Jonah, the biblical Jonah. Did you always have this sort of like draw to this? I'm a librarian in a day school, in a Jewish day school, and it does seem to be the one character in the Bible that the kids really will latch on to. Did you have this as a young kid?
I did, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I feel like even people who aren't familiar with the Bible, there's something about that image of being swallowed by a giant fish that really sticks with people. And it's a very unusual image, but I think there is something about it that corresponds to that feeling we've all had of being completely overwhelmed and bound up in circumstance beyond our control. I think that's something everyone goes through, and I think that's one reason that image is so resonant and why Jonah is a character who we all sort of know, regardless of how familiar we are with any other book in the Bible.
Could I ask you about the whole religion theme? You name it the book of Jonah, rather, which obviously is religious, and then as you read that very first chapter, it smacks you over the head with theology. In a very secularized world where a lot of people may not even know who Jonah is, how did you arrive there? I can understand an Archibald MacLeish writing a book of Job in 1960, or Faulkner writing Absalom, or 150 years ago another guy writing about a whale, which invokes the Jonah story. But that whole consciousness of religion is different for them.
Yeah, no question. I think that's actually one thing that led me to want to write the book, because I think I think many people are very caught up in a very a logical, rational mindset, and that's certainly true for me largely. I think we look at the world in a very materialistic way, and I think there's a lot of great reasons for that, and I think that's a very understandable way to look at the world. But I am personally and artistically very interested in experiences that push beyond those boundaries, and and I'm not talking about mystical experiences. I think feelings of falling in love or tremendous grief, things like that, push us and make us attentive to the world that falls outside the limits of what is clearly defined by what we can understand with our senses, say. Not to get too hippie.
Let me introduce another. Last week in New York, I happened to sit in a reading by an author whose books were on religious topics. Mm-hmm. And his comment and a question from the audience was, well, you write all the time about religion. Do you believe in God? Mm-hmm. And he said flatly and unequivocally, absolutely not. I haven't read the book yet. Can I ask you that question?
Yes, you can ask the question, and yes, I do. So, I don't know, I guess, your statistics, half of authors believe in God, I don't know.
The other I listened to was Salman Rushdie.
Oh, that's really funny. But, I'll add something here that pages and pages of this novel don't feel like they're about religion at all. I think that there is... it's interesting that it's the inspiration and it kind of provides the scaffolding to the book, but we've talked about this. I don't think it's a book about religion necessarily.
Yeah, no, I would say I would not say it's a religious novel to the exclusion of other things. I think to me it's a human novel. It's about people experiencing things they never thought that fall outside the boundaries of what they expected from their lives. And I think to the extent that it is a religious novel, it's about religious questions playing out in people's lives. and whether you even would want to call them religious questions at all, but is a different question. But I think it's just a matter of when we are faced with things like grief, the unexpected, our lives falling apart, that is when we may have that instinct to look towards religion. Or obviously some people don't, a lot of people don't.
And the other thing we were talking about earlier is this, I don't know if you said this here, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but that you set out first to write a book of short stories, each of which was inspired by a biblical tale because you just love the stories in the Bible, and then you got sort of stuck on Jonah?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I started writing this short story that was going to be Jonah, and it just sort of grew and grew and grew, and there's just more material than I could fit in a short story. That's it was the genesis of the book.
So Amsterdam, Las Vegas. I know you lived in New York. Did Amsterdam and Las Vegas? Did you choose those cities because you'd been there, or did you choose them and then go there?
Yeah, no, I'd been to both those cities several times. I actually went back to Las Vegas after I decided that I was going to feature it prominently in the book because, I'd been to Las Vegas as a tourist, and I'd been on the Strip, and I wanted to sort of see everything else besides that. How does someone who lives in Las Vegas live, and what's that city like? So I guess that was sort of the research aspect of writing the book, was trying to visit that and sort of get a real feel for it. Amsterdam I'd been to. Well, I lived in Europe for a few years and visited Amsterdam a few times and spent some time there. And with that, it's interesting. The way you write about the book, I feel let me put it this way. I tried to write about Amsterdam as Jonah would see it. And Jonah is in Amsterdam essentially as a tourist. He's someone who is not really interested in what else is going on besides, the tourist stuff. So I felt for that, the fact that I'd been there as a visitor, I'd only stayed there briefly on a couple occasions, was okay, and then I could make that work.
Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Let's give a big round of applause to Joshua and to Jillian as well for a marvelous evening. I also want to say something that I think is appropriate. This is his very first event. He's going out on tour. The book has just been published. I think we're not even supposed to sell it tonight. Tomorrow but you can buy it tonight. We have plenty of copies. But I would also like to say that I think when I look around this room, I think that tonight is going to augur very well for your book. There's a couple of things going for it. One is the character's middle name is Daniel, Jonah Daniel. My beloved twins are named Jonah and Daniel, so that's a great thing. The second thing is that we have some remarkable people in the audience, and we have some of Miami's finest writers here tonight as well. And that, I think, is going to speak very highly. We've got Les Standiford, who's over here, who's the Director of Creative Writing for FIU. We've got Deborah Dean, the marvelous author of Madonnas of Leningrad. We have Evelina Galang, right over here, who's the Director of Creative Writing at University of Miami. And her fiancé, Chauncey Mabe, who's one of the best book critics that exists. I hope I didn't forget any other writers in the audience, but if I did. And the last thing I want to say is that I have read a lot of acknowledgments, and I told this to Josh earlier. What he didn't say is that his wife is in the audience as well. And he wrote this acknowledgment that I just thought I would share with you to give you an idea of, the heart of this guy. Finally, the greatest good luck I ever had was at the old Yankee Stadium in 2004, when I sat down beside a woman who has filled my life with joy and adventure ever since. Julie, without your generosity of spirit, your faith, your intelligence, this book could not have been written. I don't know if I can ever find a way to thank you for that, but I'm grateful I have a lifetime to try. Isn't that beautiful? And there's Julie right over there. So let's send this guy out with a lot of good luck and hope that this book does what it should do. Congratulations.